Well, hello, 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 hello. My name is Nicole Phillip with Emmy Marketing, and I am so excited for our topic tonight. We are here to help our ministries, our churches, or you may even just be a kingdompreneur lead in a pandemic. And again, I'm excited for our special guest today, Dr. Cathy O. She has so much experience that she's going to apply in a practical way. A lot of times, we all have spiritual backgrounds. So we all know that. We all know how to apply the word of God to our growth for our ministries, our churches, our kingdom missions. But there are some practical things that we can do and leadership principles that not only you, but your team needs to go to the next level, especially during this pandemic. We all have seen so much during this time. And I tell you, you don't want to miss the core principles that are going to be released today. So let me just go on and introduce you to Dr. Cathy O. She is an author. She's an instructor. She's a speaker. She has been on national stages, and hopefully she'll share the last speaking engagement she shared with thousands, hundreds of thousands of women on a national level with national, international speakers. She has ministerial experience and know the culture of many different denominations or churches, as well as she has educational experience and over 25 plus years and experience, and she has touched many states across the United States. So you may be thinking, okay, well, it's different here in Texas, it's different here in Florida, it's different here in New York. But these principles transcend and goes beyond boundaries. So today I want to give her enough time to really share what she has in store for us. So we're focusing on how we can develop ourselves as well as our teams as we're leading through this pandemic. Dr. Cathy O, it is on you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And it is such a pleasure to be with everyone today. As you said, I am Dr. Cathy Owens-Oliver, and I have traveled so much in the education space, training and teaching leaders and other educators, education policymakers. And I have found in my own ministry work that a lot of what we do in the educational system transfers into ministry as well. So I have grown in my outreach work to include a lot of the leadership development and training that I do with schools and colleges and state departments, with churches and ministries, both at the local level, state and district levels. And I've presented at a lot of national conferences as well for various denominations. Most recently, I presented at the Success Women's Conference, which was an international conference, but the focus there was also leadership, how women can lead without compromising their families, the things they love and what's important to them. That is also true in ministry, because sometimes we can get so busy doing our ministry work that we don't maintain the work-life balance. And so I do a lot of that coaching with leaders as well. So I'm excited tonight to talk about leading in a pandemic and what that looks like, and how we rethink what back to church looks like after COVID. So let's get started. I have a few slides I want to share with you to just kind of talk everybody through what I think is a good structure or thinking model for how we plan to reinstitute a ministry as we used to know it, and what the new normal might be. So the question then is, what does back to church really look like? I want to focus on three concepts. One, what is it that we need to do? Secondly, how are we going to get that done? And then three, who's the right person to do it in our current and local ministry now, or perhaps even someone that we need to engage? When we think about church growth, ministry, and leadership, we cannot think about it as top down. I'm in charge. I tell everybody what to do. We have to think of it in terms of bottom up. One of the things that Jesus did, the very first part of his ministry on earth, was to engage a team. He appointed what I like to call 11 disciples and one traitor, but he engaged a team from the very beginning. And good leadership is all about how you engage a team and how you get them involved. So in this post-COVID era, we need to really think about, who do we have leading? What do we have them leading? What skills are they equipped with? What support and help do they need in order to be successful? All of this is so critical for leadership. What are the characteristics for leadership post-COVID? And that's based on not just who people are as leaders, but what people will need and how they'll need to be ministered to. So leadership is really an important piece. And let me just say to you, regardless of where you serve in a ministry, whether you're the pastor or in some other capacity, it is really important to understand that people are following you, watching your life, and paying attention to how you lead and serve. And so they need to be following you as you are following Christ. They have to see that being modeled and demonstrated even during and after this pandemic. You need to think holistically about your leadership tier. I call it tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. You may not have heard this before. So leadership tier 1, of course, is the pastor and whomever the pastor is accountable to. Because even if you're the pastor, you have a mentor, a godfather, your own pastor or bishop, but there's somebody, a big brother in the gospel, that you too are accountable to. So tier 1 is that executive level tier of the church that may or may not include the pastor's spouse. It just depends on what your structure is in your local ministry. Tier 2 of church leadership, are you ready for this? It is not necessarily the deacons, the elders, the finance team. Tier 2, are you ready? This is the worship department. If we look at the scriptures, we understand how the Levites, the Levitical order, was sent out in the beginning to establish the presence of God. I'm saying that to say to you, in your executive leadership tier, your church board and trustees and the pastor and whoever is in top level leadership, there's a second tier underneath that. And that tier is not based on positions, offices, and assignments. That tier is based on the music ministry. And one thing we have learned during this pandemic is how music ministries should operate, could operate, how they might operate when we go back to the brick and mortar church or what have you. But when we look at the scriptures early on, we recognize that a little drama in the music arena had a little upset in heaven anyway, if you will. So that part is important, and you want to make sure that that's intact, because that's important to lead people to the next level and shift the atmosphere. The third tier of leadership then would be your other officers and auxiliary leaders. Perhaps some of the deacons, some of the others who lead various ministries, departments, operations, projects within the ministry. All three of these tiers need leadership training, and they need to have this exact same conversation. How do we build? How do we rebuild? How do we reestablish? How do we grow and expand the ministry after the pandemic? So leadership is the most important piece. It is the foundation. And I'm saying to pastors everywhere, I hope you figured out now, you cannot do this alone. Engage the right team of people who can help you. So there's so much more to leadership training, but it is critical that you get actual training on how to lead, that you provide that to your parishioners, but not just how to lead, but how to lead differently and effectively during traumatic times, whether it be this pandemic or something else that could be happening in your community. The second level, remember I said this is bottom up, not top down. So after leadership as the foundation, the second level is member care. Thinking critically through how you're going to serve the various members in your church, not based on what you want to do, but based on what they need. Both during and after this pandemic, the needs of our members have changed drastically. And so we have to make modifications and accommodations based on what their needs are. You have to think about grief and therapy and professional therapy and counseling. You have to think about aloneness and solitude, what that has looked like for young people, what that may have looked like for the elderly and the seniors in your ministry. You have to think about the impact this has had on marriages, the financial impact, any challenges and stress associated with that, the decision making around whether or not your children should go back to school, to the brick and mortar school, or in an online virtual environment. Just think about what it's like for all of your members who have a child going to kindergarten. Their introduction to the whole K-12 experience as we know it is completely different than what we've seen and what we experienced ourselves as children. So as members of our ministry, there are varied needs based on people's circumstances and conditions, and you have to be sure that you have processes in place to minister to people and meet them wherever their need is. Perhaps there's an issue with unemployment. Perhaps there's an issue with healthcare and disability, a loved one who is or has been in a nursing home, someone who has been tested positive for COVID and not doing well, or those who are recovering. The list goes on and on. How do we take care of our members? And that has to be increased during and after the pandemic than when it was before. If that was a weak area in your ministry before, certainly by now you're working to strengthen that. But that also requires training for your leaders, and it also requires what I call hard conversations around not just what you want to do and not just what your leadership tiers idea of service is, but what the conditions are in that ministry in your local community and what really needs to get done. And there are a lot of members who will not express what their needs are unless you ask them. Surely you have someone calling people, checking on them, especially those who may not be logging in for Zoom or StreamYard or whatever platform you're using. But how are you keeping in touch with all of your members through prayer and ministry, Bible study, Sunday school, which is also Bible study, but whatever it is that they need, think about all the rehearsals that you had, all of the events, everything from cleaning the church perhaps on the weekend to planning some major event or anniversary service or holiday gathering. All of those things look different now during the pandemic. You can't just let them go and say, everybody needs to understand this, we're doing things differently with COVID. You have to think through, what does that look like now in a virtual environment? What does it look like for our actual members? How do we celebrate birthdays during this pandemic? How do we celebrate high school and college graduation? How do we celebrate a marriage and engagement? What does that look like? How do we keep our members feeling like we're here to serve them and knowing that they're being cared for? And when you look at the foundation of these tiers I have here on the screen, with leadership being at the bottom, member care being in the middle, those are your top two priorities. The third piece is whole church engagement. After your leaders have really talked about the direction that you're going and have been trained on how to get there and what to do next, then we have to talk about what are the best ways to serve our members, what are the needs that they have right now, how do we take care of them? So then that third piece is whole church engagement. One of the mistakes we make in ministry is overemphasis on the numbers. More people, just get everybody here, just get people in the pews. And it's beyond that. It's getting them engaged when they are not in the pews. You cannot lead a successful ministry on Sundays and one weeknight alone. You can't. And most of you know that. I know that you are progressive and forward thinking. And those of you who have inherited a church because you were what I call a transplant pastor have very different needs, and the perspectives of your members may be very different from those I call pioneer pastors, those who did a startup, they started their own ministry. Those are two strikingly different issues, and engagement in those two different kinds of churches or church environments can look very different. So engagement for a pioneer church has been this slow ongoing growth for months or years where people are coming acclimated to how things are done, what to get involved in, who to talk to about it. But engagement in a transplant ministry where the pastor has come from somewhere else may look differently. And new pastors, young pastors, have to be very, and young doesn't always mean just age. Young means new, and sometimes it also means novice. But you have to be careful not to make a lot of radical changes when you have a stable, seasoned audience, because you're on trial, not them. And so you want to make sure that they have an opportunity to engage with you. But whole church engagement means you've thought through with your leadership team and your member care team strategies for how to get people involved, what they will be involved in, how. That kind of thing is so important. And let me share with you a little bit about what whole church engagement looks like. You might be saying, well, Dr. Cathy, that sounds good. How are we going to get them involved in a virtual environment? What will we do to get them to come back? What will we do if they don't want to come back? And a lot of you, engagement will look exactly like what it looks like in the school system, a hybrid model. You will have groups of those who still come to services in the building or activities in the building, and you'll have to follow certain guidelines. And then you'll have those who are continuing to connect virtually. They want to, they've enjoyed it. Some of them are doing it for safety. Some of them are doing it for convenience, but you'll have to figure out a hybrid model the same way to keep everyone engaged. So there are some specific targeted efforts you have to put in place to get them involved in ministry and to retain them as well. Gone are the days of spectator church. You may have a few of your members who are just coming to watch, but we're living in a season now. I call it the season of Issachar, where you have to understand the times and you have to know what to do and have people in place to get it done. So in today's time, people want to be involved in something, whether it's the parking lot, whether it is calling to check on the elderly, taking a senior person or a group of them to doctor's appointments, water aerobics at the Y. Did you hear that? Meeting members who are retired or have it in their schedule that they can go. You'd be surprised. So you're going to have to be really creative now. And members do want to get involved in whatever they feel they can contribute to the advancement of the kingdom. So you have to have a plan in place for engagement to still provide those kinds of opportunities even after COVID. First of all, you have to have a targeted plan for the youth. I've been working on another piece with a group of churches on what the church needs to know about the educational crisis. If ever there was a time that you needed to have a community development corporation, a grant for at-risk youth, any kind of activity that addresses math and literacy, that time was yesterday. So you have to think of specific ways to get the youth involved, both recreationally, but also educationally and spiritually. And I have to tell you, I've traveled a lot. I've done a lot of work with ministries and churches across the country, and it looks different everywhere. And I am appalled at how many churches here in the 21st century think that the spiritual component is all that they need, and they'll get the other social, emotional learning from somewhere else. In some cases, they're not getting it from school or somewhere else. And in some cases, we don't want them to because of the foundations of what we believe. So then you have to make sure there is something in place for youth of all ages. I could give you 15 different examples of what that looks like, but you want to meet with your leadership team, your transition team, your implementation team, your post-COVID team, your back to church team, but you need to meet with the team and make sure that young people aren't slipping through the cracks. You need to think about your young adults, and that's very different. These are those, get in college and beyond. Some of them are engaged, some of them are getting married, some of them don't know what they want to do with their lives, some of them are staying home, they've dropped out of college for whatever reason, they've lost loved ones and they're back at home. The list goes on and on and on. So you have to think about the millennials and Gen Z or the Zoomers. This is the age of the entrepreneur. And a lot of young adults in this group, that's what they're thinking. I don't need to go to college. I'm going to start an online business and I'm going to be a multimillionaire. And that may really be true, but you want to make sure that they have the right kind of guidance and support and direction. And sometimes that can't just be left up to parents. So think about what that looks like in a church. A good friend of mine is a pastor in Michigan. And in response to so many of the young people being on their phones during the message, and he was sure they weren't using it for the Bible app, he created a challenge for them. And so he decided that on the fourth week of every month, fourth Sunday night, actually, they would have this youth celebration, and he would financially reward the young person who had received the most likes and comments on his message, the pastor. So now young people who are sitting in the back playing on their phones or engaged with somebody else have now moved to the front. They're sitting beside the first lady and church mothers and deacons and elders and whomever else is on the front row, because they want to get a good video. And now they're starting watch parties on social media, and they're contacting their friends to say, like my page, like my page. And what they think they're doing is competing for that $25 a month. Now think about what that cost him in a year. What, $300 a year to do this out of his pocket? For $25, these young people were competing like they were going to get $5,000, but they had to have the most likes and the most comments on the pastor's message, not the praise and worship or musical intro, not anything that happened afterward, not the church announcements. It had to be the message. Now, what did the pastor accomplish? He got young adults to hear the word and to pay attention. But he did it in a way that was a targeted effort to draw them in. So that's just one example, but you have to think about what engagement looks like for them. You also have to think about the single adults, both single and I call them single again. How will you get them engaged? And this can be done right now. Is there a third Thursday meeting online for everybody who's single, where, you know, married couples and singles and engaged couples are logging on to talk to other single people about their experience, to talk to them about what they're doing at home, especially those who may live alone, all of those kinds of things. But how do you get them engaged? And not just what service do you provide for them, but what can you get them engaged in that lights a fire within them that causes them to go out and serve others? You may ask a group of singles to come up with an activity, a community engagement event that's going to draw people to the ministry and give them a sense of fulfillment, and it doesn't have anything to do with being single. So think creatively about that. And then you have those married, those soon to be married. Don't let them slip through the cracks after the pandemic. When and if you should go back into your brick and mortar building. It may not be an environment where you can just sit down with them in a closed office and talk to them about their marriage. It may not be an environment where you can join hands to pray for them or lay hands on them. However, you provide ministry to a new and young couple, but they're still going to need advice and support and guidance and insight. How will you provide it? What will it look like? Is it an online Bible study? Is it a monthly meetup? Is there someone in your tier 3 leadership tier who's assigned to keep this group engaged and to work with them? And remember what I said, it's both serving this group, but it's also getting them involved in something where they feel like they're serving. Maybe this whole team puts together a So You Want to Be Married online, activity or show or some kind of virtual event or pamphlet. You have to get creative about keeping your ministry engaged. The second one, of course, the seasoned and the elderly. My mother is in her mid-80s and she's not logging onto a computer. We've just got her out of a flip phone, believe it or not. And so my mother calls in on Sundays to hear the message on the phone as a conference call. Now, other members are seeing it, watching it virtually. That's not happening at my mother's house where she doesn't have Wi-Fi and doesn't even want it. So how do you keep her engaged? So the pastor and his wife ensure that she is on that conference call. And there are other elderly members who they're doing this for as well. But what are you doing to keep these seasoned ones engaged? And listen, Here, same point again, not just what you're doing for them, but what opportunities are you creating for them to do something? I hope you're getting good ideas from this. Can you imagine if someone asked my mother to make a prayer quilt for all the newly married couples? Can you imagine if someone asked her to make a prayer quilt for the three college students who have gone away and they're on campus even during this pandemic, or a prayer pillow or a pillow covering? I mean, I just want you to think about how creative that would be. I work with one church as a client, and they have a team of elderly women who crochet little caps, and they donate them to the ICU, to the local hospital for babies in the NICU. You have to start thinking right now about how all of the different entities or sections of your members are still being engaged and connected. And then finally, it's a group I call special populations. So it may be people with some kind of learning disability or challenge or handicap or any exceptional need. It may be someone who's transient. You may be in an environment where you have someone's in the military or whatever reason, you have members coming and going. Those who are aspiring to ministry, it may be them. Or it may be overcomers, recovering from addiction, out of prison, recovery, whatever that is. But you want to think about all of these different groups in terms of keeping them engaged. After we move from level 3, whole church engagement, we have to rethink policies and procedures and protocols, because we won't be able to just do church the way we used to. My local church, it has had to rethink communion, where we now have to use the prepackaged cups that have the wafer and the drink all in the same little plastic package. But previously it's very ceremonial and in our ministry, and that's not how we were doing it. But we've had to do that now for safety and for precaution. But there are so many other protocols for how people file into the sanctuary, how they leave, how you're going to manage who does what online, what's going to be the role of the elders and that kind of thing. How will you manage prayer at church? All of these different things, events. If you served food after a service, what does that look like now? How are you managing it? All of these things are so critical to rethinking what back to church could look like whenever that is for you. So what are the protocols, policies, and procedures? Do you know that during this entire pandemic, I would say 70% of our church has been giving online through the church website or Givelify, Cash App, some kind of online app. But there is another 30% who drives to our church every Sunday afternoon. The deacons have a table set up outside. They have their envelope. They fill out their handwritten envelope. They put their cash money in it and they drop it in the basket through the window of their car for the table. And I think some of them are coming because they want to see the pastor and the deacons and some of the elders, and they want to say, hey, how you doing? How's it going? How's your wife? Some of it is just connection. I think that's part of it. I think some of it is mindset. I'm not putting my money in these different apps. I don't know how they make sure it's going to get where it goes. Some of it is technology limitation. I don't understand how to use these online apps, but I want you to think about the convenience of giving online for those who want to and know how, against the opportunity of those doing a Sunday offering drive-through. Do you see the value of both of them? So when we rethink back to church, we need to look at the value of having both of these options. And our leadership teams have to be wise enough to know this is not just about filling out an envelope and giving the offering. This is about fellowship. So when one of the mothers, and it doesn't have to be one of the mothers, it could be a young person, it has baked cupcakes, and you can get those as well, or somebody's passing out, the youth are there and they're passing out water bottles at every car, it's still engagement. It's still fellowship. So think about what will your new reproved procedures and protocols be? What will it look like for giving, for altar ministry, for music ministry, for community outreach? You have to think through what that would look like. And I've worked with a lot of churches on putting this strategic plan together. The fifth one is community outreach and evangelism. We are definitely living in a time now where a majority of our evangelism and outreach, of course, is done in a virtual community. I've had a lot of pastors report to me that they have more members now, that they've not seen a lag in their giving, that they have even more people engaged in watching online, turning in their offerings, commenting on the message, that kind of thing. But you also have to think about the community, the people on your church's periphery who, looked out the window and thought many times I should walk over to that church, or live in the community and drove by saying, next Sunday, I'm going to go. And a lot of those people have engaged with you online now, with or without your knowledge, because one thing about a national crisis, it draws people to God. A national crisis always gets attention for God. And so you have to take advantage of that in a godly way. So what does community outreach look like for you? And I am going to push the envelope a little bit on this. Is community outreach an after school program where you still have social distancing, but educators in your church provide support for children in the neighborhood who absolutely are going to need tutorial assistance and remediation now more than ever. That's an example. I've worked with some ministries who are really forward thinking about that. Others are afraid of going back into the building at all. A lot of it has to do with your facility, whether you can follow CDC guidelines, whether you have the right kind of professional staff who know how to coordinate this kind of a program. But that's an example. Taking groceries to the homes of elderly in your community. I work with a church who takes a team of people every Saturday, different teams, but a team every Saturday goes to a hospital, and they have signs written out to let people know, we're praying for you. We're praying for your healing. We believe God with you. That's an intercessory prayer team, but that is community outreach. So you have to think about, what does serving the needs of your church's peripheral community look like after COVID? And don't miss that opportunity. The Bible says, if I be lifted up, I'll draw men unto me. He'll do the drawing. You have to lift him up. And you have to do that outside of the four walls of your community or your online church without walls. You have to think about the people on your church's periphery. And then the last piece is really big. We always seem to focus on how we can get more members, but we don't put enough attention on how we're going to retain them. So you have to always be asking yourself, what is going to make Cathy come back? What is going to make Nicole come back? Whoever the members are in your ministry, what is it that keeps them coming back? Do they keep coming back because they know the deacons are out there at the table on Sunday afternoons collecting their offerings? Do they keep coming back for the word? Of course we want them to keep coming back for the word, but a lot of them also enjoy the music. It's the fellowship. It's the people that they sit near. It's how they get to engage online. It's the online Bible study. It's the youth gaming competition that the church is hosting. All of these things. What keeps them coming back? Is it the Bible quiz bowl? Is it this working with the scholarship committee? There are members in your church who do one thing a whole entire year, 12 months, they are committed to that one thing. Women's Day, pastor's anniversary, pastor's wife's birthday, mother's board fellowship, usher board union meeting. I could go on and on with all these different themes and titles, but what is it that keeps your members coming back? Don't lose that thing. Don't change it. You can enhance it, expand it, strengthen it, increase the structure, but don't lose that. And you don't know what keeps people coming back if you don't ask them, if you don't do a survey, if you don't call and do some interviews, if you don't set something up on your website. Nicole can help you with that, where they fill out a quick survey. What is it you love the most about church? What have we been successful with this year? What keeps you coming back? When you invite someone to our church, what is it that you say about it? This is more important now than it has ever been, because you're going to use the data and the feedback to think through what post-COVID really looks like for your ministry. And get this, What about these people that you don't really know who have been joining your church virtually, and they may live 500 miles away? So sometimes in our traditional thinking about ministry, we assume that members are people who come on Sunday and walk down to the altar, take the right hand of fellowship or whatever the protocol is in your belief system, and that makes them a member. They go through the new members classes for a month, 3 months, 5 months, God forbid, whatever practice and procedure we have in place. Not today. That works for the local community, but you have people who are probably watching your church from 3, 4, 5 states away. They could be in a different time zone. They may not even watch on Sundays. They may watch every Monday night, every Monday during their lunchtime at work, whenever it is. They are your members now. How will you keep them retained? And I've had to challenge some pastors' thinking and some of their leaders' thinking when I've done some mindset work with ministry leaders, because some of them feel like if you live in Texas, you should be going to church in Texas. And if you live in Dallas, there are good enough churches for you in Dallas. You don't have to be a part of my church in California. Not today. Ministry looks so differently now. The 21st century and everything that the online opportunity provides is so much bigger than what you could ever imagine. But I want you to think about Jesus and the disciples feeding 5,000 people with a fish snack from the fish box restaurant down the street. And I'm jesting here just for the sake of humor, but I want you to really imagine a crowd of 5,000. Imagine yourself at a major league game or in an airport. Think about how many people that really is. And don't tell me that those 12 disciples were able to get to every single person in a really short time. It's just like being a shepherd who has 100, 200 sheep. There are some way in the back, way to the left, way to the right. You have to have people in place to reach all of them. So don't miss your opportunity for ministry by not thinking about and engaging these members you have at a distance. My pastor calls them members afar, who tithe and are totally locked into ministry and are very supportive and involved in the prayer team, but they live 300 miles away from the brick and mortar church. So retention, that was the last piece, not just focused on how you can get them, but focused on how you retain them. I would encourage you to do this. I've worked through this with a lot of teams. I'd be happy to do this with your team, but looking at your last year in review, either pre-COVID or during the pandemic, what has been the most successful activity or event and why? What department or area of ministry or auxiliary is the most effective, not just operating efficiently, but effective? What has been the most unified group? Why is that? You need to look at this. You need to get this data. You need to analyze what's working and what's not. And then the third question, what are these subgroups that need the most attention? Is it the elderly? Is it the youth? Is it the newly married? Is it the transient? Is it those who are part of the church afar? You need to think about that. And then here are 5 closing points about growing and expanding your ministry. The whole point of Jesus's walk with and tutelage and mentoring of the disciples was to grow ministry so that they could go therefore into highways and hedges and make other disciples. And so that kind of growth requires a team strategy and shared values. You have to have people on your leadership team who understand strategy and planning. They understand the season of Issachar. They understand the times. They know what to do, and they have shared values. They believe, they're locked in, they're committed 100% to the goals and objectives you have for moving the ministry forward. Growth in your ministry is an inside job. It's not just people. If people would come in here, then we would grow. No, it's an inside job. So something has to be taking place on the inside, and that has to be everybody's responsibility. And so when you have whole church engagement and everybody's involved in doing their thing, whatever that thing is, that makes the ministry grow. The third point is the growth of your ministry will always be limited to your internal capacity. I work with churches in my coaching around what capacity looks like, because one of the biggest mistakes that pastors and leaders make is giving large responsibilities to small thinkers. You may be the most prayerful, you may be the most faithful, and I'm sure you're trustworthy, but you may not have the kind of thinking, direction, strategic planning, spiritual acumen, implementation ideas that are necessary to move a ministry project forward. So you have to look at the capacity of the people in leadership, what they can do, what they can't do, what they do well, what they don't do well, and make sure you have not just the right people, but in the right place. And I have a whole protocol I walk ministries through on how to get people in the right place. Ministry growth is judged by impact, not volume. Whether you have 50, 500, or 5,000, can you be faithful? What have you done with what I gave you? You know the story of the 5 talents. Did you go and just hide it? Bring me back what you had with no revenue, no gains, no growth, no exponential increase? Did you go out and multiply it and make it more? What did it look like? What was the trajectory? So the impact of your ministry is so much more important than how many you have. And I just want every pastor out there to be encouraged, whether you have 15 members or 150 or 15,000. What God cares about is, what difference did you make? What did you do with what I gave you? I have seen people be more faithful with 1,500 members and more connected and engaged than people who had twice as many. I've seen people with a handful of members and involvement in their church, and I've wondered, why in the world can't you be successful? So it goes both ways, but God is looking at the impact. What difference did you make? And then last, the growth of your ministry is the outcome of how effective you are. Efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing, and we need to work through that. So here's a little bit of information about me. You heard that at the beginning. You can reach out to me at any time, info@drcathyo.com. This website link is private, so it's drcathyo.com/ministry. So if you go to my website, you won't get the ministry part unless you click /ministry. Nicole has worked closely with my team. She does an excellent job. Don't let technology be the reason why you're not moving ministry forward, because I know Nicole is helping you to do that well. Thank you so much for this time. And please reach out to me for ways that I can provide leadership, coaching, and training for your team and help make sure that your church is ready and relevant for ministry post-COVID.
Wow, that was amazing. That was amazing. There were a couple of points that I really want to extract because it caused me, because I'm in ministry as well and a part of the leadership team, and it caused me to really rethink a lot of things. And one of the things I really want to point out before we go and you share a little bit about how they can get plugged in is, sometimes in ministry, we don't seek outside help to train and develop our leaders. And so with just this conversation, it sparked creativity and innovation, that being kind of plugged in and ingrained in the day-to-day operations of ministry, you're like, okay, well, I didn't think about that. Or, you know, we do it like this, or we've always done it like this. Why don't they just fall in line to what we've been doing?
Right.
So I want you to just take a moment and share why it's so important, or even someone is saying, you know, I don't know, she may not know my denomination, or she may not know, you know, our protocols and how we do it. Why is it important, or why does that person, that pastor, that leader need to know the significance of reaching out to outside help?
Yes, really, really good question. So I'm thinking of 2 scriptures, and I know that pastors and leaders think through the lens of the word. In the book of 2 Kings, Elisha told the widow to go and borrow vases. He asked her, what do you have in your house? She said, I have nothing. I can't pay my bills. My husband has passed away. They're coming for my sons. I have nothing but this oil, which is symbolic. And so he said, well, go and borrow vases. Well, in her traditional thinking, we don't do that around here. We don't go door to door asking people for help and bothering stuff. But asking for the help was the only way to get her to the next level. All
Wow.
he asked her to do was go and borrow vases. When she borrowed the vases from several different people, then the oil multiplied. And a lot of times, pastors and leaders, you want the oil multiplied, but you don't want to borrow vases.
Wow.
And so you have to ask for help. The other one is Saul and David. And unfortunately, there is a Saul spirit in a lot of leadership teams and committees of churches where people don't want to ask for help because they want the credit, they want the accolades, they're used to being in charge, they're concerned of how they might be perceived if they don't know it themselves. But the situation that Saul had got worse and worse and worse with Goliath and the Philistines. He had no choice but to ask for help because the help that he had was inadequate. So pastors, no matter how much you love that member and want to keep them engaged and how much they've been there, I'm not suggesting that you throw them away, but I'm just saying as you move to another level, you're going to need a different kind of help, and you have to be willing to ask for what you need.
Yeah, that is so important. I think leaders on all levels deal with that, especially and I've personally dealt with that. Like, I don't know what they'll think of me, or after the fact, will the help be a help to me, or will it really hinder me? So then you take on this, I'll just do it myself, or I'll just do it with this nucleus of people. So definitely plugging into outside help is going to be super important because we have to do something different.
Yes.
The other thing that really stood out is assessing the needs of your members and your community.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times we'll do that just in conversation, but you talked about a survey. Is there one or two questions that a ministry team can put on that survey that will give them valid data that they can use to really measure the needs of their membership?
Sure. And I actually have one that I have done for the millennial group because that's been such a focus in the past, but really how to engage them because we make a lot of assumptions about what they need and don't need. But one of the questions I think for membership at large is, what do you love most about the ministry? Or what is the one thing you don't want us to take away? That speaks volumes because your leadership team might assume, oh, I just love the music department, which is true, a majority of people. But when you ask them what is the one thing, they may name that thing that really, strikes at their heart or what has ministered to the most to them or someone in their family. So you really have to ask that question. Another question is, what skills do you have in your career or job that transfer to ministry?
Wow.
A lot of times we don't ask people that, but you're a perfect example, Nicole. Imagine you sitting in someone's ministry and you probably have 15 things right off the bat that you could say or do that or is going to enhance the virtual experience, the online experience, online engagement, traffic to the website. But if no one knows that you have those skills or even just that passion and that you're good at it, then they may miss opportunities. So leaders need to survey and ask their members, what is it that you do in your professional career, or what other skills and interests do you have that could transfer to the ministry?
Good. Thank you. Now, the last question I really want to talk about that literally blew me away, was the capacity.
Yeah.
And assigning big responsibilities to small thinkers. So let's talk just a little bit about that because what happens is, a lot of people will experience stagnation or delay or even discouragement because their idea, even as a leader or as a pastor, is not supported. So rather than, we have all of this going on, I don't want to have to, wrestle with the idea that's not supported by the leaders around me or even their senior leader.
Sure. So the question then is how to get the right person involved in the project.
Yes.
So we have to be willing to face the facts about someone's capacity, even if they don't.
Mm.
And sometimes we're so careful not to hurt somebody's feelings, so careful that this person not be offended, that we will respect and value seniority over effectiveness, because it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. What matters today is if you can do it well. That's what ministry is about. In the scriptures, the people said to Jesus, "We took this problem to your disciples. They couldn't do anything." So
Wow.
as leaders, we have to recognize when Cathy took this project to this level. In order for it to go to the next level, I'm going to have to get Nicole involved in the project. I may have to give the project to Nicole. I may have to mentor Cathy out of the role and into an advisory capacity, but allow Nicole to move into the role to really effectuate change. And that has to be done with love and care and wisdom, but it also has to be done with thick skin. Because one of the tragedies in ministries is giving a large project to a small thinker. And let me say this part, I don't want to take up too much time, but I see it the most in youth ministry, where someone who just loves children wants to be in that role forever. But in our churches, we have to move beyond loving children to teaching them the fruit of the Spirit. And then we have to move beyond loving and teaching them the fruit of the Spirit to making sure that they're reading on grade level at school and that they have grades on their report card. And so you have to care about that holistically. And if you don't have the capacity to offer that kind of thinking and planning, then you probably don't need to be running the youth ministry or managing that class. And I could give you examples: the media team, the music department, the finance team. You just don't want a small thinker managing a big project, because it doesn't just, if you're focused on protecting that person's feelings, then that means you're compromising what could be 100, 200, 1,000 other members who aren't being adequately served.
Yeah. And, for that leader that has been in a position, I've experienced that as well. And sometimes we have to be in a place, in a position where we are self-aware, because it might be that God is trying to do something new in you.
Yeah.
But you won't move, or you won't, dare to do something different. Because I know I love doing things that I do well. Everybody does. But sometimes God will say, to go to the next level, you have to humble yourself and try new things.
Yes.
And so, as the senior leader is working through that and having the courage to build up their teams and transition in new people, as those who support that senior leader, you have to always reevaluate, what is God saying for you during this season? Is there a different ministry that you need to impact during this time? Yes. And it does not take away your value.
Yes.
That was one of the biggest things that I've just gone through this particular season. And as I was transitioning during the season, I was like, okay, well, who am I now? If I'm not doing that, who am I now?
Right.
And so now it gives room for God to do something new in me. And so as you guys think about that, what Dr. Cathy O has shared tonight, I really want you to know that she is an asset for you guys. Her eyes, because she's not ingrained in the ministry, her eyes are a clear perspective. And she can ignite new ideas and creativity, and even interpret what a leader is saying, as well as those supporting leaders. And now you can have dialogue and open communication without conflict. Yeah. And so that's super important. I want her to share a little bit of how, again, you can get involved by booking an appointment so that she can be a part of your ministry growth in this post-pandemic or pandemic that we're in now.
Yes, absolutely. So you can go to drcathyo.com work with me in order to get on my calendar for 15 minutes, 30 minutes. I have different levels for different things. Maybe you just want to bounce ideas off. Maybe you want to do some planning and problem solving. Maybe you want a whole synergy group of your leadership team, and we spend 90 minutes together really working through some issues and what the future could look like. You also could go to drkathyo.com/ministry, and then you could see some of the other workshops and trainings that I have available to you. Listen, I love to do this work, and I believe that we're in a season now where we want our ministries to not just work like clockwork and be efficient, but we want them to be effective. And I'm here to help you do that. Write to me at info@drkathyo.com, drkathyo.com. In all of my educational work, and Nicole does an outstanding job making sure that I have visibility and an online presence for my consulting firm, Educational Effectiveness Group. And so while we work primarily with schools and school leaders, I do a lot of this work with ministries as well. So I'd be happy to work with you at various different levels and in different capacities.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Again, please plug in, and we look forward to hearing more about how you have grown during this time. My name is Nicole Phillip, and our special guest again was Dr. Cathy Owens, and we thank you. Goodbye.